So good evening, everybody. Again, sorry for this little delay. Some of you I've known from the past. It's good to see you. And has everyone been attending this program, the Become Your Own Therapist program?
Yes.
Has people been attending it off and on? And because I was talking back and forth with Jundup, and it was a little tricky because you never know where people are at in terms of how this program's been running for a couple of years, right? Yeah. So what I'd like to do is I'll just start presenting. Excuse me. And because I have taught my own version of this many times. That's why I wanted to share my PowerPoint with you. And just because we had a different approach, and you've had a lot of guest speakers, I've seen that, and people have different approaches. I'm wondering, for those of you who have been on it, what kind of things have resonated for you, if you don't mind me asking, because I like to have a little bit of interaction, if that's okay, for a few minutes, and maybe later on too. What kind of content, or what kind of content was it helpful for you? In terms of this particular series, what's attractive about it for you? Anybody want to say?
For the most part, it's been question and answer. Most will start with the topic and maybe monologue for several minutes, and then after that open it up to question and answer. So okay. I think anything can happen.
Well, for those of you who, thank you, Shayla, nice. Okay, let me just reintroduce myself. Some of you know me. So I started on this journey in 1975 when I went to Nepal. One of those year abroad programs from college, and I stayed about 12 more years. I stretched out that year. And so I was at Kopan studying under Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, but I was also a worker. And so working for Lama in the monastery. So that's just the short version. When I returned to the States in 1988, the Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I didn't know what to do because I'd been in Nepal doing this other thing for so long. And how that relates to living in America was interesting. So I had 2 kids at that point, little kids. I've ended up having 3 children. And Rinpoche suggested to become, what did he say? Work in psychology, something to that effect. And so I got my clinical psych degree, a master's degree, and then I became a licensed psychotherapist. I worked with families, couples, individuals, and I worked with, I also did coaching in businesses because I needed to make some money. But the challenge is that this area of Buddhist psychology is so complete that you can ask me questions if you're ever interested about what it was like to have spent, I'd been a Buddhist for that point about 14 years, and then going into graduate school and studying modern psychology was challenging. For me, it was very challenging. And some of the main challenges were that in Buddhist psychology, really we have a complete psychology. And there's agreement amongst the various schools of Buddhism in terms of there's not 100% agreement, there's some discussion, but overall, there's an acceptance of the model of psychology that's presented in the Buddhist teachings. If you go to Korea and talk with a scholar there, you go to China or to Sri Lanka or wherever, Nepal, Tibet, you're not going to have a lot of divergence in terms of the understanding of the model, a psychology model. So that was what was hard, because when anybody here study, or any of you mental health practitioners or social workers or anything? Anybody? Lucky you. So
I'm a social worker and just retired yesterday.
Oh my gosh, that's Irlanda. Where do you live?
No, it's Jay West. I'm in South Australia, in Adelaide. I did child protection and crisis work for about 30 years. And then the last 8 has been palliative care.
Oh, so yeah, intense stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And the work itself, talking with people, I adore. People I worked with, wonderful. Clients, even in child protection, very doable. It's the system that, of course, crushes your soul.
Yeah, and the other question, because I love philosophy and psychology, the other question is how you integrate it. You know, I don't know your Buddhist background, but certainly when you start studying Buddhist psychology, it's not that it's a contradiction to, well, there are some contradictions in modern work, modern psychology. I'm sure you found that. I also worked for CPS for a couple of years as an intern, and it's powerful work. It's powerful work. The challenge comes, well, there's many challenges. So, did you find that how long have you been involved in Buddhist psychology?
Buddhism, not that long, but prior to that, in 1980, for a couple of years, I lived at a Vedic ashram, and there was a big emphasis on, quote, dyads and communication and talking directly to what we would call the Buddha nature of the person, and communicating with that. So there's a lot of overlap that I've had both spiritually and professionally.
So, and you're in South Australia, you said, right?
Yes, I am. Yeah. And I would describe myself as being spiritually eclectic. Yeah.
Good. Well, so there are some basic, and I think next time we meet, I'll have it a little more together in terms of the presentation, because I'll figure out how to share the screen, or I'll send it to Dundu. Because I have also done, some comparative psychology classes, taught them, in terms of modern psychology and Buddhist psychology, and how they agree and how they diverge. And the first place to start, of course, is what's the goal in terms of Buddhist psychology. Now, I think probably Josu, right? Jaisu? Jaiso. You're probably familiar with the DSM in terms of all the diagnostic criteria and all that sort of stuff and diagnosing. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct for me. Didn't really. No, I was specifically in mental health the first 2 or 3 years. And then, like I said, I then went into crisis work, child protection. DSM was not real applicable, and certainly not the last 7 years in palliative care. Okay, and the name's just Jay. That's South Australia.
Yeah, I'm not putting my glasses on because I'm so vain. I don't want to show how I can't see. So Jay, thank you. So when we look at the ideas, between Buddhist psychology and modern psychology, what do they have any overlap, and do they have any relevance to each other? And the way that I would put it is that when you really look deeply within Buddhist psychology, you got to think, well, what's the intent behind this, right? What is the intent? Why did Buddha teach this? I think that His Holiness Dalai Lama said that, and I agree with it, 2/3 of the Buddhist teachings are really psychology oriented. So when we talk about becoming your own psychologist, that would be, or own therapist, it's been something that was prevalent. I would say, we could paraphrase in what Buddha himself taught. He never taught that he was going to liberate people or he was going to make them healthy, did he? He said you have to work it out yourselves. Even when he died, the last thing he says, work it out yourselves. Work it out. So what is it that you're working out? And this is where I asked Jay about the DSM. If you're going to study in terms of modern psychology, it's very, very tricky. It's really amazing to find, an agreed upon goal amongst the different schools of modern psychology. Whereas in Buddhist psychology, the goal is all agreed upon. There's not a discrepancy. There are shorter term goals, but then the long term goal, of course, is liberation or enlightenment. Why? So if we were to take on a different description in terms of becoming our own therapist, the reason it works is because enlightenment or liberation are not the best terms when trying to understand. I don't think, and sometimes when we're in an introductory level, when we're trying to explain to a modern audience what is Buddhist psychology, and we say, oh, well, it's to become enlightened. It doesn't resonate. What does that mean? become enlightened. It sounds very lofty, which it is, of course, but it's also not. And I wanted to read a quote from Lama Yeshe, and gosh darn it, I wish I had this, could share this. So let me just bring that up real quick and read it. So, Lama said, Lama's my main teacher, as is Lama Zopa Rinpoche, of course, but back in those days. So he says, these days people study and train to become psychologists. Buddha's idea is that everyone should become a psychologist. Each of you should know your own mind. You should become your own psychologist. This is definitely possible. Every human being has the ability to understand his or her own mind. When you understand your own mind, control follows naturally. It's beautiful. There's a lot to unpack in that. And I've remember reading Lama recently, and he talked about this, which I didn't really catch when I first had this up, this quote up. The last line being, when you understand your own mind, control follows naturally. And I would say that is the theme, the intent behind becoming your own therapist. When you understand your own mind, control follows naturally. So, and then if we were thinking about, can we translate that to everyday life and everyday people? I think you can. But the difference is that when we go in modern psychology, which is mostly talk therapy, but it's other interventions too. The challenge with talk therapy, if you have this kind of understanding of Buddhist psychology, when you understand your own mind, control follows naturally. That's pretty interesting. But then it comes down to, well, what is the mind, right? What is the mind? And I think people in this class, you've all probably studied to a degree, right? Going back to you all studied. Does anyone has not? Well, I don't like putting you on the spot. That's not very fair, but we need to, if what Lama says is true, that understanding the mind is the way to control the mind. There's a couple of questions come up with that. Why control the mind? Okay, so when we're working in normal therapeutic setting, what are we trying to do? Now, a lot of times they speak, at least here in the States, that the therapist's job is really not psychotherapy, actually. It's pretty interesting. It's about relationships. Okay. I don't know about in Australia, but that's pretty surprising. Of course, if you talk about working with the mind itself, maybe you're a little more, if you're in, here in California, if you're a licensed psychologist, maybe then you're thinking you're working more with the mind. But psychotherapists, marriage family therapists are always, the main emphasis is on relationships between couples and between families and partners and things like that. So what does that have to do with what does that have to do with control? Okay. So we're changing the paradigm here. And the paradigm in Buddhist psychology is that every living being wants to be happy. Every living being wants to be satisfied. Every living being wants to be peaceful, at peace. Okay. And when we, as when we kind of go to catch a spider that's in your bathtub, it runs away, doesn't it? Why?
Fear of the unknown.
Fear of the unknown, and what else?
I said it just doesn't want to be caught.
It doesn't want to be caught. I mean, we can only sort of assume, but it's protecting its life, right? We could say that, couldn't we?
Yep.
So it has fear, or maybe fear, or a sense that it's going to suffer. Just put in gross words. It's avoiding suffering, isn't it? What it perceives as suffering. Of course, it's frustrating because you're trying to help it, but it doesn't know that. So that little thing about the spider trying to avoid being caught, even though you're trying to help it, that little example is actually quite profound. So when we are spending each moment in our day, and gets really pretty powerful, each moment of our day and every body action, every movement we make, every thought we have, we could say is in the realm or in the arena of wanting to be happy. And we can take any of these experiences and deconstruct them and see if that's true. Okay? But I think you probably are going to go along with me on that. So then the second question about control. So second question is, well, all these things that I do they work? Okay. And we're studied Buddhism. We know that, these things don't work for long-lasting satisfaction, everlasting satisfaction, as Lama Zopa used to say. So here the goal in when we look in the modern psychology, when you study the different theories and modalities in modern psychotherapy, for the most part, there are not, and I'm going to make this generalization because I'm sure generalizations are not always right. They're generalizations. The generalization is that you're trying to fix something. Okay, you're trying to fix something. I'm not saying it shouldn't be fixed. If you have a leaky faucet, you got to fix the faucet. Okay, so but it's not about finding permanent solutions to the mind that's stuck. And the mind that's stuck is what Buddha called the suffering, in nature of suffering. Okay, it's stuck. It's just stuck. There's a form of therapy that arose out of Australia that I'm very fond of. It's my main focus. And I'm wondering, Jay, probably you know about narrative therapy, right? Michael White?
Yes, I have the privilege of actually sitting in on classes with him ages ago, decades ago. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. And then there was his colleague from New Zealand. I can't remember his name.
I can't remember, but I remember the face.
Yeah, I had a beard. Anyway, so yeah, so in narrative therapy, which has the reason I have affection for it, it has many common language for Buddhists. If you're a Buddhist wanting to become a therapist, then I suggest narrative therapy is one of the best languages I know that helps you to translate your Buddhist ideas for secular people, for non-Buddhist people. But they rebelled against the whole idea of diagnosis because they feel that it's just it's a way of totalizing a person as whatever disorder you give them. And I worked at Stanford. I didn't want to work at Stanford. I was encouraged by my supervisor because he said, well, you know how to do the other stuff. You need to go work in the epitome of the medical model, which it was. And it was very helpful. It was very helpful. But, I had to do a lot of diagnosing. That was my job. Diagnose this kid, and then we'll work with him. And so, I used the DSM-J a lot because I had to. I didn't like it. So this totalization, so then you start looking at bipolar disorder or manic depressive disorders or mild depression, dysthymia, or you look at personality disorders and things like that. It's all around disorders. Okay. And what I could see from the most part of the work of the psychotherapist is managing disorders, even probably, hopefully getting rid of them. So if you're having a major depressive disorder, the goal of the therapy is help you get undepressed. That's a lofty goal. That's great. But that's not what the Buddhist psychology approach is about, is it? Okay. And that's why it's maybe not for everybody. It's kind of brutal. And I never saw, whenever I had problems, many problems, depressed or whatever, when I was living with, in Kopan Monastery, and I'd run into Lama Zopa, he would almost never make me feel better. Right then. He would never make me feel better right then. But today, even what he said back then resonated for the next 40 years. And I still work with it. I mean, in other words, what he said was helpful for long-term happiness. In fact, he beat me up all the time. He criticized me, he put me down. It's like so many times I wanted to run away. I was going to fly out into Kathmandu. I was going to run all the way to the airport. I didn't care, and I didn't, fortunately, but because he wasn't interested. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I say the same. Any of these very awakened beings, depending on the student, of course, because if it's if it was my mother, Lama wouldn't relate. In fact, he didn't relate to her that way because she wasn't committed to a spiritual path. The Buddha. You know what I mean? It depends on the person's temperament, of course. But if your temperament is one that you're sick of this up and down, up and down, up and down, and you're really aware of this up and down that we go through throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the months, throughout the years, then there becomes a commitment like, this is messed up. I'm sick of this, right? I think we all have had that. We all have had that. And we're being sick of it that's when the Buddhist approach makes a lot of sense. So, when someone comes into the emergency room bleeding from a car accident, you don't teach philosophy to that person. You don't teach, you got to patch them up and help them live. So that's the work of modern psychotherapists, psychologists, I feel. They have to help people survive. But a lot of people, and I don't know if this is your guys' experience, a lot of people, after you've worked with them a little bit and they've kind of got a handle on the presenting problem, I find that people want something more. I think everyone is looking. I don't know. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, but I think everyone's looking for real satisfaction. They just don't know what it is. They haven't been taught the ideas. It's not in our schools. It's not taught to our kids, and people are dissatisfied. And during COVID, this is accentuated in some ways even more. What do you think? Think people are satisfied? No. Do you think people are looking to be satisfied?
Guys, just unmute yourselves and go for it. It's a small group.
Yeah, so small. I won't embarrass you. Well, I might. I can't promise I won't. I'll try not to. I was told there's a lot of discussion in this group. Did I not say anything?
I think the terminology that I know is people do ultimately, once we get certain things satisfied in life, the basics, the existential questions do come up on some level. Why am I here? What's going on? What's my purpose? All of that. People do tend to look at that, but I 100% agree with you. There is so much in modern society that distracts us from any of those questions. We don't really want to face up to them. We'd rather watch computer games and do all that. Yeah, which is sad, especially the younger generation so plugged in.
Yeah, but people like the philosophy. They like the psychology, I found. Don't you think?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
If they presented it, people, I find that that generally speaking, people are much more capable of understanding these concepts than we give them credit for. I think the problem is from our side, sometimes we don't communicate them well. You know what Einstein said, right? And Lama Yeshe basically said the same thing. Lama Yeshe told me, you need to teach these ideas so your mother understands them.
Mm-hmm.
And Lama was a hardcore believer that all of these, and I I think he left me with that challenge. I feel that that's my challenge in life, is even everything up and including, the teachings on emptiness and reality, and the teachings on the, even the tenet system, which is very profound in terms of sutra. I feel that all of that, even Lama Yeshe communicated tantra in a way that people could understand. I think it's on us. Einstein said, if you can't explain a complex subject simply, then you don't understand it well enough. And and that's how I saw, Lama, and Lama Yeshe was just an example. Of course, Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, His Holiness Dalai Lama. You really go back and look at His Holiness's teachings. So, he's really explains these complex ideas and comes down to our level to teach them. Same with Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So, there is a place for formal study, right? There's a place for that. I'm not talking about the devoted student, devoted Buddhist. We need the formal studies. And in that case, we don't want as much. You got to be careful that sometimes it seems these days the formal teachings are being watered down, and they're being what's a softer word for corrupted? Anyone got a better word?
Mainstream.
Well, mainstream, watered down. How about that?
Yep. Yeah. Diluted.
Yeah. Diluted. So that's a shame. It's okay. It's okay for people who are not, but those who are interested in, I remember I was working with Lama Zopa Rinpoche on a book. I think many of you might know the publication from the Universal Education Problem from FDCW called the 16 Guidelines. And maybe you don't, but it was a traditional Tibetan text that Lama Zopa Rinpoche had chosen for them to present to in a common language to a secular audience. And in one of the verses, it mentions about rebirth, and the writer took that out because it's challenging, isn't it? Right? It's rebirth is one of those ones that's like always gets a bit of a conversation going with people who are not, don't hold that faith. And Rinpoche was really showed kind of that he was bit upset, and in the republication told her to put it back in. And his comment was, if you don't put it there, you don't give people a chance. And it's something like 65% of all people believe in rebirth anyway, right? So I thought that's interesting. So we have to be very careful when we water down stuff and make it palatable to a larger audience. I know there's a great movement to do that. And then there is benefit because we attract or we touch a wider audience, don't we? But we should think about what the cost is, right? So is it better to have a wider reach, but what we're reaching people with is something that's not authentic? And when I say authentic, I don't mean the Tibetan language or the Sanskrit language. As I said, we have to teach these ideas so that our mother understands them. Doesn't mean you change the ideas, though. You just have to work with it. How can you explain? Can we explain this Buddhist psychology to everyday people? Of course, we can, especially to therapists because they have a language already. So, yeah. But in modern psychology, I have a question for you. So maybe I discuss this in another class. I'm sure this is my soapbox. I tell people I have a soapbox. I have many soapboxes, but one of them is the soapbox of the psychologist, psychotherapist. Okay. So when we look at the word and when we deconstruct the word psychologist, okay. Psychologist. Psych means what? What does psyche mean?
Mind.
Yep, it means mind. Mind, spirit, like that. And an ologist, what's an ologist?
Scientist.
What is actually, doesn't it mean a student of, a studier of?
Study of.
Study of the psyche. So if you're a psychotherapist, then you're therapizing the psyche, right? Makes sense. Right? Anyone disagree? Yeah. Rolando, were you raising your hand? Or you're frozen, I think. Oh, you're in your car. That's right.
No, I'm in the car. I was driving, so I just pulled over.
Okay. So if we think about psychotherapist is a therapizer of the psyche, right? Or a psychologist is a student or the studier of the psyche, right? So now, now I have a question for. Now it's not very fair. I can only pick on Jay because she's in the mental health field. Do you mind if I pick on you, Jay? I'm not really going to.
Just to clarify,
I'm not going to hurt your feelings.
I'm not mental health per se. Okay, for social work, that's not our approach exactly. Yeah,
right.
It's hopefully more holistic.
That's true.
But go for it. I'll do my best.
Okay, you can just allow me to be my shill. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Don't worry. I won't hurt you. So in your class, in your study, or anybody here, I mean, everyone has studied a little bit of psychology. Anybody ever see? So let's just say we're all psychologists. Okay. We don't put Jay on the spot by herself. She's a social worker anyway. So let's say we're psychologists. Okay. So we're students of the mind, right? Or we're psychotherapists or therapizers. We do therapy with the psyche, right? Which means we treat the psyche. So how many have ever received? It would be good if you're a heart surgeon, right? Heart surgeon, you're going to know what the heart is, right? You know, the ventricles, the aortas, all this stuff, right? Okay. So isn't it weird? Have any of you ever heard a definition of the mind from the Western modality? You haven't. I've already checked. I sat there for 2.5 years as a graduate student, having come from Nepal, and I kept waiting for the definition. Now people will say certain things about, if you're studying Freudian early work, then you hear about the ego and the id and that kind of stuff, subconscious, and then you hear about object relations later on, and then you get the narrative therapists who say, nah, forget it, there is no psychology at all, because they found that all these models of psychology were used to essentially disempower people, from the point of view of the psychologist being the powerful expert. And anyway, so we don't hear and we certainly don't hear an agreed upon definition. Now, recently, in the last 10-15 years, through a lot of through the interactions with the Holy Dalai Lama and scientists, they are working. Then there's some neuroscientists, and they have come up with they're beginning to come up with sort of a working definition of the mind, and I think that's amazing. But it's interesting. It's coming from a relationship with Buddhism. So, but my point is, if you're going to go get have open heart surgery, I think you'd want to be sure that your surgeon knew what the heart was. You think about it. So here we have psychologists, psychotherapists. They have no definition of the mind. They don't know what it is. Now, doesn't mean they can't help people. Okay. But what is the help? What is the help that they're providing? So we go back to relationships. Remember how to relate, how to relate to your spouse, your children, how to make the family more functional and reduce conflict. That's all good stuff. But maybe they shouldn't be called psychologists or psychotherapists. Like Jay is a social worker. That makes sense. That title, social worker, makes total sense. Okay. I know I'm being critical, but that's my soapbox because I can't. Now, there's a psychologist who is one of the leading neuroscientist researchers, Daniel Siegel. I think probably people might know of him, Dan Siegel from UCLA in Los Angeles, and he gives a lot of workshops, and he said he's asked that question. So his workshops are filled with psychologists and psychiatrists and psychotherapists and educators and social workers, mental health professionals for the most part. And he said he's asked 100,000 people He calculates at his workshops and seminars and lectures how many had ever received a definition or a class on the mind. It's pretty outrageous, I think. And he said maybe 5%. And then and I asked him, so well, those 5%, where'd they get it? And he said, oh, they got it from Buddhist classes. I think that'll change. I think it'll change, and I think it is changing, especially with the advent of neuroscience. So, in order to become so I got to stick to the topic, become your own therapist. We'll go back to Lama Yeshe's description. We have to know our own mind. And I got on this whole rave from the fact that, well, knowing your mind, because he says then you get control, but are we aware that our mind is not in control? And are we aware that it's not in control and that being in control would be a good thing? I don't know if we have that. I don't know if we've reached that yet. What do you think? Dundrup, you told me people would talk, but they're all. Am I intimidating them?
Prior to Buddhism, I thought that I was in complete control of my mind. I now know that I'm just way behind the 8 ball.
So with that, there is probably, well, I'm assuming, so with that's interesting. So you're also making, discovering that you thought you had control of your mind. Now you realize you don't have control of your mind. Would you say then that you, at the same time, realizing that you don't have a level of contentment or satisfaction or happiness that you thought you did? I mean, how's that changed? You know what I mean?
Well, I thought that I had concentration. I thought that I had, I had basic control, and obviously with meditation, I now know that it's far from having any sort of control of what goes on in my mind.
Would you share your ideas about why control is important?
So my background is law enforcement, and being able to control every moment of every day of every aspect, I thought that I had that. Boy, am I wrong. And a lot of that came with retirement as well. So
what do you notice about when you're able to exercise some control? What's the feeling like?
it just still feels uncontrollable. Yeah.
So
does that make sense? Yeah, still feels, it's not entirely. Yeah, I'm not there, and I'm okay with that.
But I guess what I'm asking is, you see the connection that having control would be a good thing.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Probably before that wasn't a concept, was it? I mean, before.
No.
Yeah.
No. I don't think I had a moment to even think about that. I just thought that I had a control. I had a control over all aspects of my life.
Right. And we can think that it's kind of a curse. I often talk about the curse of Buddhism. It's sometimes better not to know. It feels like, and then once you know a little bit, you can't unknow that stuff, right? Once you just like you go to, oh, this Buddhism looks interesting. I think I'll go take a class, and then you hear something that just you can't unhear. You hear that, they talk about life is suffering. I don't know about that. Then you investigate. You can't help not investigate, right? You hear that, you're gonna investigate. You can't just say, oh, well, you could, but so then you open that door just a little bit, and you're done. I mean, you're cursed. You're doomed, because you got to. Then you're going to open a little more because you want to understand a little bit more, and things. In many ways, things are not that great. When you start looking at the nature of suffering, in the way that I think that Buddha really taught it, we're not. We're not really, there's three. So there's the three levels of suffering, right? So the three levels of suffering. So there's suffering is the basic suffering, the suffering of pain. Okay. And even animals understand that one. So that's when you stub your toe, and you got to get your toothache, your knees ache, your body aches, through sickness, through aging, those kinds of, it's just inevitable, right? So every creature knows that level of suffering. But then we come to the suffering of change. And which is very interesting, because I think in modern psychology are dealing with the first one, the pain. It's called suffering of pain, but because it also includes emotional pain, and so then we start looking at, our partner criticizes us, right? And then we feel some sense of pain, right? Emotional pain and upsetness. So that can also be considered the first suffering of pain. And then sometimes referred to suffering or suffering of pain. So the second one is suffering of change. And now we get into a much more profound arena of understanding suffering. And this is where I think the Buddhists want us to get to. The suffering of change, I think, also as we age. I met the Dharmas just turned 21. And I mean, I immediately resonated with it. I was in Nepal. I did the famous November course at Kopan, and with Rinpoche, with all the fleas jumping all over our legs and all that sort of stuff. Where we did. Has anyone here been to Kopan? You have, okay. You have also. So it's not like it was. Now there's hot showers and it's beautiful. Where we did the course was the buffalo shed, the water buffaloes. We had buffaloes for milk for the boys, for the kids, for the monks. And so when the November course would come, they take all the buffaloes out and the cows and put them around the other side of the hill for the month, and then they lay these straw mats down in this tin. There was already a tin roof, and these sort of straw mats for the walls. And it was November, so it wasn't very warm. And then, of course, we had all the fleas jumping on us that were there, and the buffaloes were there. So, but we loved it. We loved it. We didn't know. So, with the suffering of, I don't know why I brought that up. Someone remember why I brought that up? I don't know. I go on tangents sometimes. So so remember now the suffering of change is more sophisticated. That's what I was going to get to. The point I was going to get to. I know. I resonated with these teachings sitting in that buffalo shed, and listening to these teachings from Lama Zopa, teaching hours and hours on end, and Lama Yeshe would come in to make us feel better for a while, maybe once or twice during the month, but I would say, honestly, I feel I resonate or perceive suffering much better now than then. I don't think it was just having meditated on more. I'm sure that's part of it. I also think, meditating, over years, one thing that we don't notice is when we become more and more familiar with the mind. So our goal is to become more familiar with the mind, and we use different techniques, right? Whether it's Lam Rim techniques, or meditating on death, meditating on suffering, meditating on thought transformation, or meditating. But just meditating makes you open, right? It opens you up, and all of a sudden you start seeing that our minds are functioning, and we didn't know. We didn't know that mind was functioning. Correct? It's like this huge epiphany. And so now I think it's easier for me to understand that everything is in the nature of suffering, especially when we start looking at change. So when I look forward to seeing my kids, because I think it does make me, happy on a fundamental level, of course. But what happens is we get tricked normal people get tricked into thinking that is happiness. So it's different. Lama Yeshe said, he didn't understand. He used to talk to us in Nepal. He says, I don't understand why you people dress that way. Why don't you dress really nicely? And why are you living here? And he told my wife and I to stay, but most people he eventually would send back home. He said, you have such beautiful things there. You should enjoy them. And then people say, well, we're learning the Dharma, not to be attached, and, renunciation and all those cause suffering. And he said, you have to understand, you have beautiful things, you should enjoy them. And Lama did. Lama had beautiful things, enjoyed them. Most of them he gave away. He said, enjoy, just don't cling. So he understood. We make the mistake that a nice house, nice car, nice family, nice kids, nice neighborhood, nice country is the source of suffering, right? Nice car. I shouldn't have a nice car. It's gonna, it's in suffering. It's not true. That's a misconception. None of those things. All of those things are neutral. You know that? Even nuclear power plants or nuclear arms, they're all neutral. They're not bad. They're not inherently bad. I know it's a bit what's confrontive, provocative. But when you analyze, even, which I hate guns, by the way, don't get me wrong, but even a gun is not bad by itself. It's the mind, the perception of these things. So then when you begin to see that if our main goal is the happiness is spending time with my kids, and now they're back up in San Francisco, when am I going to see them again? Oh, not for a couple more weeks. You know what I mean? That's suffering. That's the suffering of change, because I've gotten hooked. And nothing that I get hooked, nothing I believe that will make me satisfied lasts. So the suffering of change is the psychological mechanism that gets us to cling. Okay, that's change is there no matter what. So the suffering of change is the misconception that the thing is not changing. That's the suffering of change. Suffering of change is not your car getting older. The suffering of change is not the grass or the weeds taking over your lawn. Okay? The suffering of change is the perception of permanence on everything. Everything. When almost nothing is permanent, right? So when we if we don't have much grasping to the cup of tea that we're gonna, like Lama's, well, he was a tantrika, as well, but he used to just love his tea, and he just would enjoy it. And he said to me, he says, you don't even know how to make a good cup of tea. Of course, I mean, but what he meant was, and you didn't know how to enjoy it. Of course you should enjoy the tea, but you don't know how. Because real enjoyment is not the way we do it. The real enjoyment is when we think enjoyment is to savor it, right? Take each sip slowly, and that's okay. But it's not it. Are you clinging or not clinging? And for people who are more more expert in Buddhist thought, so the whole practice of offering, offerings, you offer your tea, you offer your food, you offer your family, you offer your house, you offer your meditation. It's just to combat the sense of clinging. That's all. You don't have to not enjoy it. You should enjoy meditation. Okay, you should enjoy a cup of tea. You should enjoy being with your friends. But we're going back to become your own therapist. What's the mind doing? And this doesn't make sense until we begin to understand that this is in the nature of suffering. So it otherwise doesn't make any sense. Okay. How is enjoying my family in the nature of suffering? How is that? Well, that comes to the third suffering, okay, which is pervasive, compounded suffering. And here's where we need to take a little leap. Why is enjoying my family in the nature of suffering? It's because the way I'm perceiving the situation, I'm perceiving it incorrectly. So it's not my kids; they're not the problem. It's the perception. I see them as permanent. They're not changing. Now everyone says, Oh, I know they're changing, they're getting older, and I know they're changing moment to moment. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the mind. Does your mind see that? Is that the object of our perception? Remember, that's only the second one, the suffering of change. Third one, the suffering of pervasive or compounded for suffering, is we believe what we see. We believe that that cup of tea or that car exists truly. Forget about the permanence, that too, we see it as permanent. But we also see it as existing the way it appears when it doesn't. I mean, can you think of anything more suffering than that? I mean, let's say, yeah, what can I say? I'm trying to think of a good example of that. But if we're going through our life seeing things incorrectly, which we are, can't we say that that's suffering? Because if I think that the magicians, it's a bad example. Sorry, I don't mean to offend anybody. I was thinking about for some reason, pornography. The reason pornography works is because people think there's really beauty in a person or something, or pleasure, satisfaction there, when it's nothing. It's nothing but pixels, right? I'm not trying to demean the women that are exploited, mostly women. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the experience for the person to enjoy pornography, for example. He has to see it as truly real, doesn't he? Or else it's not enjoyable. Or a movie. When my kids were young, I thought best way to have them, my wife didn't want them to watch too much TV. And so I thought the better way to go is teach them how to watch TV. So when they would get a little scared in a movie or something, I'd say, well, wait a minute. We'd freeze it, maybe I'd pause it. And I'd say, well, there's a camera over here. And then that is this, that's not a real, and there's a camera. And then there's this lighting. And then, deconstruct it for them and show them more the reality of it. Now, that's not the reality according to Buddhist thought, of course, right? But it's a good metaphor for when we deconstruct in a thing that I'm so enthralled with, when we deconstruct it and see what it really is, it's not that. And if that's not suffering, I don't know what is. Because we're living in a total hallucinated lie. Okay, see you later next week. No, 2 weeks. Any question? Any challenges? Does that make sense? Nonsense? Logical sense? Insense? Everyone's quiet. It's 7 o'clock, right, Dundu? My job is finished, right? If anyone wants to comment, I'm happy to stay a minute or two.
Please, while I have everybody here, and Venerable, you afforded us the privilege of a little spillover in Martin's class. If Karuna would like to have that in future, can we do the same here? Like spill over till 15 minutes or whatever?
It's entirely up to the teacher. The classes are an hour, so it's entirely up to how things are going.
No, it's fine. I talk too much anyway. So no, spillover is good. If people, especially people, have something to say, I like the interaction. And I also want to thank you all for having your being live on the video feed, because it does. I attend a lot of classes with. I think Geshe Dundup. Does anyone here go to Geshe Drogpa's classes? Dundup, do you? So there's like 50 people on, and then like 10 people have their camera. And it's just I like as many as we can. It's more interactive for me. It's more personal. So spillover. What do you want to spill over?
I mean, I wasn't meaning particularly for today. It's just to get permission from Venerable for the future, because this class is running like 2 months, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm curious what it was like before. What else has happened in it? But I heard that you're saying that it had a lot of question answer, but we didn't do any hardly any. I asked questions, but I didn't get any answers. A few answers. You guys are not fair. No, it's perfectly fine. There's a lot we can do. I think I'm Dundrup, is it 5 classes? I don't remember. 4 classes? Do you remember? Doesn't really matter.
Is 3 more this month, and then 4 the next month.
Okay. What would people, I really want to know what people would like. You maybe, if you don't want to say right now, it's fine, but if you can let Dundrup know, because I am really into giving you what's helpful. And sometimes without interaction, I may not know exactly what's helpful because I'm not clairvoyant.
Okay, one thing that I'm addressing within myself, and I have addressed since I was 6 years old, because I went to confession as a Catholic, so I know. I had nothing else to confess but anger. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I have made some progress with that, but it's still a burning issue for me. I get angry about social injustice. So of course, that's righteous anger, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I work very hard on, particularly when I'm driving, for instance, trying to channel compassion, but somebody cuts me off and anger just booms. So this has been a long-term project for me.
I understand. Yeah.
So, and yeah, it's disappointing for me because I put a lot of energy, time, work. I do with my mind in different kinds of ways to try to cope. So, input on how to deal with kind of chronic, ongoing. I think I came in rigged up this way. I think I probably chose my mother because I saw that angry energy that she had and thought, that'll do me. That'll be good. So I took her, and she helped me with, perfect it. So those kinds of things I'd like to, that's a particular interest to me.
Okay. And if you can, I'll remember too. And also if people forward things to Dundrup and you can give me, because I love talking about problems. And so I appreciate that. I could say a few words because you stimulated some thoughts in me. Is that okay if I can just say a few things about the anger? Well, so as you know, or may not know, but I think you do know that. So when we look at our job ahead of us, we were talking earlier about, well, we first need to know, why do I need to control my mind, right? Obviously, people are there in this group, I think. But the challenge is that the description of our pathology in Buddhist pathology, psychopathology, is greed, ignorance, and anger, right? I mean, those are the kind of the theme word, right? So I have the same challenge you have, by the way, and I hate it when I get angry. Now I don't think I hated it a long time ago, but now it's just so toxic because of what we're aware of, right? We're aware of this better way of being, this more pure way of being, this happier way of being. So one thing, it's not going to help at the moment, we'll talk about it more, but one thing that I am struck by is it's such a darn habit. Okay. And when we say habit, it works psychologically too. So when we talked about the third suffering, the compounded pervasive suffering, so as you may or may not know, but that is directly linked with the idea of karma. So karma, for me, when I look at karma and when I explain it to others, karma really means, for the most part, it means mental imprints. So so we all, even before this life and maybe this life, or maybe more in this life, is we generated, like, I remember my mom was very, very sweet, but she had a rage to her. She could really lose it. And I don't know if I learned that from her. I don't want to do mother blaming, but it reinforced for me for many years as a child and a young adult, being in an environment of anger, rage. So, when she got cut off, she would rage, right? Or yell or whatever it was. So those imprints, now she just died like late, what are we at now? About a year ago. She was just short of 100 years old. And she is going to take those imprints with her because I don't think she purified them.
Yep.
Right? So we all have the imprints, and depending, it's individual. Some people, the anger one is maybe not as strong, but then they have the clinging desire or greed, whatever you want to call it, and then ignorance. But we all have it, and it just takes time, and ultimately, because of my own challenge with it, when we, I really want to encourage you to the real cure to our mental afflictions, or which we could say our mental disorders. And this is something that I didn't catch on to for very many years. Compassion, tolerance and patience, empathy and gentleness, and ethics, morality. These things actually, and this is a secret, maybe Dundrup should cover his ears because he might tell on me. They actually don't purify that anger. They don't get rid of the anger. That's the bad news. They do create in a mental environment that is more balanced for a while, but they don't get rid of the seeds. Okay? The only thing that gets rid of the seeds, now we have to go to the wisdom side of things, and we have to study and meditate on nature of reality, the emptiness of so. And I'll tell you my experience. I don't have much experience, okay, but when I commit to applying the ideas of reality, nature of reality, emptiness of inherent existence to when I can, I'm not taken over by my anger or by my desire, it immediately just sort of disappears, and it doesn't come up as strong next time. Doesn't might take eons to get rid of it, maybe not eons. It might take many years, right? But it does reduce. I would promise you, it does reduce. Whereas when I focus on, if I only focus on compassion only, without without some taste of reality, of emptiness,
Yep.
it doesn't really. It helps because I become a better person, but it doesn't get rid of it.
Yep, I understand.
Yep. Okay, that's my. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll ratchet that one up.
Yeah, well, that's the practice. You see, the practice includes wisdom and compassion, doesn't it?
I know. Yeah, indeed.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Yep.
Anything else? Okay, so if you like, Dunduk, we'll stay in touch. If people just anything that you want me to address, just let him know, and I'll do my best because I think that makes a really rich class, rather than me just assuming what was useful. Okay. And now we got.
So how do we contact? Is there just the admin address attached to DN? Yeah, is that what we use?
I'll put it in the chat, and we'll put it on the event page as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, and I'll try and figure out how to share the screen. I'm not sure what. I have to learn my Mac a little more.